Well, hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Yorkshire Gamers Reet Big Wargames podcast. And today we are on episode 71, and we are going to be talking to three guests today. First time we've ever had three people on the show from an organisation called the Company of Makers, and they are involved in using wargaming as well as other things to help veterans get themselves back into civilian life having left the service. So, very interesting conversation today. Just in other news, and I was at Salute last weekend. Fantastic show, really enjoyed it, absolutely buzzing, absolutely packed as well. And would you believe the Battle of Mentana game that we've spoken about many times on this show won the Best Historical Game award, which was absolutely fantastic. I have to say, I was a bit gobsmacked and I didn't quite believe it. I thought they were having a laugh. Very surprised, but very proud as well. Really, really happy that we got that. So, with that and the Little Wars Best Podcast award that we got a couple of years ago, we are now a multi-award winning podcast. Now, I'm not going to mention it again ever, honestly, but multi-award winning. How was about that? Oh, fantastic. Of course, I did a bit Jimmy Savile there, didn't I? Might have to cut that out. Today's episode is, as I say, with the Company of Makers, and it's a really interesting conversation. Not maybe too much on the wargaming side of things, but there's a lot of talk about veterans and the things that they need and how wargaming can help veterans. And it's a wonderful organisation, and quite a few people. Dave Manley, who's been on the podcast a bit, is involved with them. They're putting on events for veterans to come along and try wargaming and use it to help them socialise and help them to adapt to civilian life post military service. So sit back and enjoy. And without further ado, here's the interview. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to episode 71 of the Yorkshire Gamers Reet Big Wargames podcast. And today we're going to be looking at a very important topic of how our hobby can help military veterans who may be struggling with civilian life. Regular listeners will know that I'm keen to promote the mental health benefits of wargaming and its associated activities, especially with the shows I've done with the hobby legend Henry Hyde on that subject. We Leeds have supported organisations like the British Legion, SAFA, and Models for Heroes at the show in Leeds over many, many years, and it's a subject close to my heart. Today, I'm very pleased to have three guys on the show who are involved with a charity called Company of Makers, who work with veterans in a variety of ways. The Makers have been involved in organising talks, doing podcasts, workshops, and recently a show at RAF Cosford called Get in the Game, which involved many names from the hobby which you would recognise. Let's take some time to learn about the work of the company, see if there's an opportunity for us all to help somewhere out there who maybe needs a little bit of a boost. So let's give our usual big Yorkshire welcome to my guests for the day. We've got Steve Bomford. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing well. Thank you for inviting me on.
Excellent, thank you. And we've got Nick down there in the bottom right. How are you doing, Nick?
Very well, thanks, Ken. Thanks for having us along.
Excellent. And finally, late to the party, but he's brought the beer. It's Conrad. How are you doing, mate?
Very well, thank you. Yep.
Excellent. Well, it's great to have you on the show, and we're going to spend a little bit of time at the start of the show just kind of talking to yourselves as individuals and maybe getting a little bit of an idea of your background and kind of your interests when it comes to wargaming and history in general. So we'll go around as we started then. So, Steve, what's kind of your if we're at the pub and you're trying to persuade me to buy you a pint, what's your kind of background history?
I don't think I've ever succeeded in getting a Yorkshireman to buy me a pint, so it would be a flipping miracle if it happened.
Well, I was setting you an impossible task to start, but it gets easier from there.
Setting me up to fail. So, Company Makers is a social enterprise. We're not a charity. It is an important difference. It was founded by myself and Rachel Owen, who is my partner and business partner 11 years ago, it started by doing upcycling furniture workshops at a veterans horticultural garden.
Wow.
So things have changed quite a bit over those
That's
11 years, to put it mildly.
that's niche.
It is, but what we're interested in is the power of creativity upon people's well-being. And in separate incarnations, myself and Rachel had run very similar workshops with people of different groups of people. And so over time, it kind of morphed into more and more subjects and activities, whether it was writing, photography, as I say, upcycling furniture. But we were very interested in doing practical things. And of course, there wasn't a computer in sight with any of this, because this was before the pandemic. Everything was as was, and we were operating face to face. So we worked with very small numbers of veterans in and around the Portsmouth area where we're still based. Majority of those were naval service veterans, and majority of those were Falklands veterans, as you might expect, given that we're in the home of the Royal Navy.
So, as an individual yourself, then, Steve, what's kind of your background? Have you had military service? What sort of things have you done in the past?
Neither I or Rachel have any military service or direct military connection. I was, prior to doing Company Makers, I was a freelance photographer, became aware of the world of social enterprise and not-for-profits.
Yeah.
A few of my friends, we got together and we put together a magazine, which was all about kind of creativity and its impact potential on well-being, but it wasn't aimed at a specific audience group. It was very much a very generalist approach. Rachel had been running a social enterprise in Liverpool, and that was working with women who were struggling with their mental health. And she was doing workshops, which is essentially where the idea came from. We sort of ported her idea. I mean, I was invited to a big meeting at HMS Nelson, which is the base here in Portsmouth, the naval base. And they were talking about the Armed Forces Covenant, the funding that became available via the Covenant or via the government through the Covenant, to help support those that have served through various activities who may be experiencing, particularly at the time, they were talking very much just about mental health challenges, but there obviously there's more to post-service life than just mental health. And I thought, well, it sounds a little bit like what Rachel's doing, in terms of some of the people she's working with in Liverpool. So I got on the phone and said, do you think what you do with some of the ladies in Liverpool would work with those that have served, with veterans? To which she said to me, bearing in mind I did not know her very well at the time, she said, Stephen. So I already knew I was in trouble.
Yeah,
I knew
Sunday name.
coming in my direction. She said, it'll work with people. So the logic of that is veterans are people. Who knew? I mean, that's
something that sometimes maybe people forget. So Nick, what about yourself then? Let's what's kind of your background?
Yeah, so what can I say? Where shall I start? So this being a Wargames podcast, been playing with toy soldiers since day dot, making up my own rules with my brother and pushing things around. Play games at school with my best friends, and then uni, 8 years in the British Army, sort of put the toys to one side. I regret to say, served in the infantry, did 2 tours in Afghanistan, finished my military career in 2013, and took to the civilian world. I'm now a management consultant full time in the infrastructure and construction space, which I enjoy. During that time, gaming has returned to me with some force. I play a lot these days, and whatever I've played, I've wanted to adapt, and that's led me to want to write games of my own. And what brought me and Steve together was a questionnaire. So the company of makers had found that Wargames were a way for, and not to steal your thunder, Steve, but Wargames were a great medium through which to connect with some of the younger cohort of the of serving personnel and veterans. Steve very thoughtfully sent out a questionnaire. A friend of mine sent me a link saying, are you into wargaming? What do you like? within that, and sort of what do you do with your hobby? Is it painting? Is it playing? Is it computer games? Is it tabletop gaming? So I filled that in, and then ended up having a fantastic chat with Steve online, and then I went down to Fort Cumberland to meet him. And Steve's question to me was, how can we help you with what you're doing? So I told him I was trying to write a game, and I said, well, I'd like to help you by taking part in the creation of a playtesting community or a rules development community where veterans who had similar slant on the hobby could get together, help each other with the authoring, hold each other to account on development, and above all playtest, which is the really knotty part. And that led to Company of Makers facilitating 2 great playtest events down at Fort Cumberland. And then ultimately this event that you mentioned up in RAF Cosford, where I got to test the game with people I hadn't met before, and just demonstrate it and practice teaching it. And then great to see you at the weekend, Ken. I took the game to Salute, which I booked sort of a year. I had no idea what I was going to do with it. I was going to get a table and put myself on the spot, and had a cracking old time with the hex board on the table. Met some brand new punters. Refined the teach, which is what I've been interested in very recently. How do you get people to the nut of this? Giving away as little information as you need to sort of bring people into the game gently and have a crack at it. But that's kind of where I am at now. Sort of the most fascinating sort of chapter of my hobby yet, and all thanks to the fantastic Company of Makers. So it's a good time, and really enjoying it.
Excellent. So just a couple of questions before we move on to Conrad. Do you remember what was the spark that got you interested into history? You said that you kind of into the toy soldier as a boy. Did you have a military in your family? Where did it come from?
Yeah, certainly. I think grandparents. Everybody from my generation had grandparents in the military on account of the massive war that happened 38 to 45. My maternal grandfather was in the Royal Artillery and sort of went ashore D-Day +1 and ended up being a forward observer officer in CoM and was up on the church tower and that sort of thing. And so that had me from get-go. My dad was in the infantry. My oldest brother in the cavalry, did Desert Storm or Op Granby as the Brits call it, and lots of Northern Ireland. I spent ages of 5 and 6 out in Northern Ireland as on an accompanied tour, my dad's tour, and so it was always in my bones really, and I always had a sense that this was a good thing to be involved with, a good thing to be interested in. Concentrated on my history at school, ended up doing a degree in war studies at King's College London, and I'm just really forever thinking about conflict. So, conflict is all about decisions, and I'm convinced now, although I haven't read up on about it enough, that games which sort of predate so many human institutions are really the sport of decision making, and it's something that we're inclined to take part in, and can it be proven that this is something that's really good for us? I think it is, and especially for veterans who during their service have had all the decision making they can eat for free, and then you sort of step into a world with perhaps not fewer decisions, but different types. So yeah, kind of natural segue from the military upbringing into history and historical gaming, and I only ever want to sort of get more and more involved in it at this point.
Cool. Thank you very much. Conrad, you've been sat there very patiently, but we did have to wait for you. So
right. Yeah, makes a change.
So, Conrad, what's kind of your background then, mate?
34-year RAF veteran. I retired in 2018 to do other things. Wargaming for me, I was a young age. I mean, I was friends with my friends, through cadets and through school. We played Dungeons and Dragons. We played a bit of World War II. I think all of us had, as Nick says, grandparents or family that were involved in it. My father and stepfather and uncles are all Royal Corps Transport, Army led. My grandfather was Coldstream Guards, so it was infantry supporting tank regiments at post D-Day. Sadly, was wounded. Didn't see much of it after that. But so a history of military background, an interest in history and wargaming from friends. I still did quite a bit of it when I first joined the Air Force, because I was based in places where I made a bunch of friends from the local community, some of whom I'm still friends with now, nearly 40 years later. Gaming dropped off for a while, but when I retired, or semi-retired, I work part-time now for RAF shooting. I sort of got back into it. I sat and enjoyed painting a few more models. Thought, I quite enjoy this again. It's not quite relaxing. It's quite focusing. Modelling and painting has come on massive leaps since I was doing it in the old Airfix kits, and I say the new Airfix kits. So many new techniques, and part of it, what I enjoyed is getting back into the swing of it, getting back with my friends. We've sort of moved away again from computer gaming. We used to do that all the time because it was easy to do. Back to board gaming and wargaming, and generally just enjoying the hobby and getting back into the social and the interest side of it. And like Nick says, I'm quite, I enjoy the study of wargaming and what it is and the what if aspect of it. That's sort of me, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. And we've had guests on in the past who, Andy Johnson, who was in the Guards, ended up as regimental sergeant major in the Coldstream Guards, so he had a fairly decent career. Was there any use of wargaming within your forces career as a learning tool? It seems to be hearing more about it now, but did you have any when you were in?
Massively so. More so when I was commissioned, because I started off as an airman fixing engines and commissioned in the logistics branch, and I got pulled into several exercises which were quite fascinating. It was like, this is how you do it. And they start off, it's the big exercise. You've got real people moving kit around. And then they actually went, it's quite expensive doing that. Let's do it on a tabletop. We had a couple of companies with computers,
You don't have to refuel a paper.
Yeah, and you can make it happen a lot faster as well. But actually sitting there and having people discuss, what we call main supply routes, and going, well, yeah, they'll do this. And like, no, they won't. Actually getting people to think about it before you've committed people to actual action and to forces to the field, and getting people to think about different options. I mean, going back over historical battles, I mean, I once had a fantastic experience at Sandhurst where they did about the Roman battles against the Iceni in England. The fascinating part was the instructor was actually dressed in Roman armour. His assistant, who was dressed as a Celt, didn't look so happy about it all. I can tell you that much. When he stood there with
was the assistant a lower rank?
You might have guessed that. Yes, he was.
Volunteered.
He was Baldric to Blackadder in that instance. It was quite entertaining. But the fact is that it was a learning curve of his history, and actually putting that into effect. Learn from the mistakes, but actually think of new ways of doing it. And simple things like, you're deploying a group of forces on the ground, and people go, well, yeah, do this and do this and do this. It's like, well, it doesn't happen at that pace. There's delays, there's actions. What if the enemy does something that you haven't thought about? Because no plan survives first contact, as we all know. And it's sort of more and more. And I sat at MOD, I sat in PGHQ a couple of times, doing quite involved exercises, but there were war games, which absolutely was vital to what we were learning. And it's become, there is an actual MOD wargaming doctrine. It's become part of the culture. It's been taken on board, very much so.
I did a really interesting episode a long time ago now with a chap called George Nafziger, who is a fairly famous historical author, but he used to run the American Army Wargame system for the senior officers in the early days of computers, and he was telling some very funny stories about beating like 4 and 5 star generals at various games and ribbing them in the pub about it later on, as he was just I can't remember what rank he was, but he was a lower rank officer. I quite enjoyed beating the senior ranks of that sort of thing. So, Nick, did you have that sort of experience as well in your forces time?
Not so much. I think that sort of wargaming manifested itself during my time it was something that was taught at Sandhurst, and then it was used regularly within the battalion as part of the battle group planning cycle. So you either in training or in real life, you go through what's called the estimate process to appraise the situation and develop a concept of operations. And for a platoon or a company, that can be the work of a couple of hours, but for the battle group, that can be the work of a couple of days, depending on how much time is available. And then at the battle group level, the intelligence officer will arrange a war game and play the red forces, play the enemy, and as a group, as a battle group planning staff, you go through a very structured, very choreographed war game, and it's really, really good to sort of red team the plan and find its weaknesses, and it forces a lot of study on a lot of sort of an entrepreneurial thinking among the staff to go, right, where are the wheels going to fall off this thing, to really go into a risk management approach looking at the plan, because we're going to rehearse it on the bird table very soon. What we didn't have, pointing more towards what Conrad was describing, was a sort of competitive gaming between ranks, which is something that I hope will become more of a feature in the military culture looking ahead. And there are people I've spoken to, and there's there's one video game company that I've spoken to. Shan't mention names now, but they have a very good war game product, that's really well suited to get people playing almost in a sort of a squash ladder fashion, within their unit, and provide a scenario in which it's really good for people to have a go and make mistakes and sort of experiment with their planning and execution methods. And I think that's something that can only be for the good.
And back to you, Steve. Obviously, you've not had the military career that the other guys have had. So, where and when did you come across wargaming, and did you have, any preconceived notions of it?
So, when we started the Get in the Game project, it was completely focused on computer gaming.
Okay.
It kind of came out of what we'd been doing through the lockdown. So we moved from obviously face-to-face activity to 100% online. And we reasoned that computer games, obviously most of which can be played online, that it would become an extension of that. And part of the process was to conduct a survey, which is the one that Nick filled out, to find out, was there any appetite within the armed forces community? And if there was, what were the interests? What did it look like? Because we can all say there's 6 billion gamers. And of course, yes, it's logical that many of them are in the armed forces, but there is, strangely enough, there was no research on anything like that. So we created this survey, covered off all the different genres within computer gaming. And within about 5 days of launching it, somebody said, is there a reason why we don't have tabletop gaming on this survey? And that was my kind of, that was my face plant moment as someone who used to play D&D, Call of Cthulhu, Aftermath, yes, and my brother who used to write his own war game rules, that I'd completely forgotten all of that. So we basically modified the survey to incorporate that, and in response to what people were asking. And I think that's also quite an important point, is that when we're doing projects or activities, whilst we have an idea of how it might work, computer gaming, but we forgot the tabletop gaming, is about being responsive to whatever the audience is telling us. Yeah. So when people make comments like that, it's about responding to it quickly and saying thank you and, amending it. And I would say that's true across the board. When we're doing events and activities, I think it's fair to say, Conrad, we've learned a lot over the hand.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I know I'll jump in on Steve's point now, and I sat there when when he sort of called me in to consult and said, "So what sort of genres are there?" And I was like, top of my head, and I sort of listed half a page of A4 of just everything from ancients through to science fiction. And I said, and just to put it in perspective, just for World War II, I can think of a dozen sets of rules that people use just for World War II. And at that point, I don't know, Steve bit the bullet and took it on quite hard. I mean, it was like, it's hard work to you can't just say everybody's going to do World War II. Everyone wants to do their thing, but the response, to Steve's survey, it was like, good feedback.
So that was, I mean, Conrad helped us put that together. In fact, did most of it in terms of the genres and questions and what kind of things we might want to ask. But I think it's definitely been a learning process, and I think it's also worth mentioning that was all kind of kicked off by funding that became available with the evacuation of Kabul, because there was funding made available, which was loosely termed the Afghanistan Fund, because clearly seeing the way way Kabul fell was likely to have quite a negative impact on many of those that served in Afghanistan. That's when we proposed the idea of using gaming of reaching younger veterans, because by definition it's a recent conflict, therefore the veterans are younger, and there is significant, I'd say, unmet need within those cohorts of people who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. So that's why we came up with the gaming idea. And as I say, we were very focused on computer gaming, but we got told and we responded accordingly.
Excellent. That's a positive feedback that's responded to. We could write a management program about that, couldn't we? We'd all make a load of money. So just to round this little bit off, then, if we had to put you down, Conrad, as what period of history or gaming is your kind of bag? What's your number one go to?
Oh, I'm World War II and modern. So I play a variation on World War II with a set of rules that I picked up in 1970s. Actually, found a reprint.
WRG.
It's Operation Warboard. The book. My original book was actually falling apart, and I found they reprinted it. And I just like those rules. They're quite simple, but I use the more modern models for it. And Team Yankee, the World War III sort of what if. I mean, I spent 34 years preparing for the Cold War that never happened. It's quite interesting to see what could have happened in many ways. And again, it's just as Steve says and Nick says, it's the decision-making process is with kit I'm familiar with and work with. So it's sort of working on that what-if scenarios most of the time.
Nick, what's kind of your go-to period of history? Are you saying more modern?
I think it's moderns and onwards. I would have said World War II and onwards previously, but the World War One bug has bit me pretty hard recently. Can't put the books down. Battle Tactics of the Western Front by Paddy Griffith being the most recent read, heavily plugged by Alex Sutherland and the Lardis. That one is what book. That's pretty much it. Been playing a bit of World War II recently. Shout out to Des Darkin, who I think was posted on your page quite recently.
Yeah, no, Des really well. He's a cracking lad.
Well, I've been around his famous Shed of War a couple of times.
Shed of War.
For some very, very aggressive games of Chain of Command, and Des very active on Facebook, and I think to become even more active, but well worth a follow. Old Des, what a gamer with what a collection and a cracking mate. So here's to you, Des. And then anything that's sort of now and what might be next, always fascinating because it's in the news and sparks the imagination how a force is going to tackle the latest challenges. Ukraine throwing up plenty of new ones. And then like a bit of sort of near future sci-fi as well, because it just takes you right out of history, and you can make up whatever you want to do. I want to do market garden with hovering craft. Why not? There's something liberating about it. That's the thing. Play some Napoleonics with my best friend, which I love, but I think it's more on the modern edge that is where my heart is for sure.
And Steve, you got a period of history? Are you a sharp man or a reacher man? Are you which kind of whereabouts are you in the periods of history do you like?
Well, this is where I have to confess to not being a war gamer or a gamer at all anymore. In terms of what period, I would say it's probably World War II onwards, because I used to read an awful lot about that, probably because my brother was making war game rules when I was much younger. I think that's the area I'm interested in, but that's also reflected in our podcast that we do, which is kind of a whole range of sort of subjects from sort of World War II to present day, but not just all about military history. I think So I think what I find fascinating about gaming in general is what we call the business of gaming, which is not just the playing of, it's the making of, the writing rules, the creating models, the painting, so on and so forth, the things that people also do outside of actually playing the game. I think that's where we've found to be a sort of should we say, very fertile area to engage with people.
Mhm.
And so when Nick got in touch and he foolishly mentioned he'd written some rules, I leapt on him, not literally. He doesn't
Yeah.
approve of behaviour like that, apparently. But I thought that I could see some potential in the idea that if someone's got some rules that need testing and need developing, and then we could see where that takes us. And that's a journey we're still on. And I think that's also the kind of conversations I had with Conrad. I actually met Conrad because he was doing one of our photography workshops online, and he made the mistake of saying he was a wargamer. So the leaping happened then. That was online, so I couldn't literally leap on him. But I think, it's about people's experiences that we certainly don't have, and knowledge that we don't have, and how can we, I wouldn't say repackage it, it's not quite the right phrase, but how can we use that knowledge and experience to resonate with the audience that we want to reach, which of course primarily for us is the armed forces community. And I think it's been quite a steep learning curve. I can't put it any other way, really.
No worries. Well, that's been a really nice introduction, and none of you are into the flouncy shirts and pointy sticks of the Italian Wars. That is one of my big favourites. I think that what I should have said was, what would you like to dress up as in a fancy dress competition, and a lance neck with a big codpiece. I think I would do all right.
There's not an image I want to see, Ken.
No, that's me, Yorkshire Gamer OnlyFans. That is, you have to pay for that. So we'll take a short break, and we'll be back with the listeners in a moment. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're back in the room, and we're going to talk in this section of the show a little bit more about the company of makers. And Steve kind of did a little brief intro of what the goals of the company of makers are. And you mentioned that it wasn't a charity and it was something else. Just go again with that, Steve, because my brain's gone.
It's a social enterprise, so we're not for profit.
Yeah.
But we are able to, but we don't trade. We essentially apply for funding from various charitable trusts, including military charities, Armed Forces Covenant, Royal Navy, Royal Marines Charity, amongst others, the RAF Benevolent Fund, to deliver projects that help support the community, the military communities.
And how does it fit in alongside those other charities then? Are you kind of networking with British Legion, SAFA, all those sorts of people, or are you more standalone?
Well, obviously, if you're funded by, say, the Royal Navy, Royal Marines charity, you're kind of answerable to them. So you kind of give a project outline. This is what we're going to do over however long a period, and this is who we will work with. So you then submit reports or progress reports and update reports. So we have, by definition, a reasonably close relationship with our funders, because you have to, for obvious reasons. Whereas the people that we collaborate with, it's a very, very diverse group of organisations. There's certainly in Portsmouth, we collaborate with Veterans Outreach Support, who run a regular drop-in, but we're also collaborating with the Veterans Wargaming Association. We're running a big Warhammer tournament down in Plymouth at the China Fleet Club next year. So it's also not just military organisations. A lot of the venues we use are increasingly non-military. So we've run stuff out of gaming cafes as well. And I think it's we feel it's quite important that when we do this kind of stuff, that, the community that we're working with is what funders often refer to as a blended community. So it's military and non-military. It's a terrible phrase because nobody likes a blended whiskey, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. No,
but that's the phrase.
If they bring back capital punishment, it should be for that offence.
Well, it's worth considering.
Alone. Blended whiskey.
Blended whiskey, because I think it's really important that we put on a good event, no matter who the audience is, and that we're achieving the target audience we're trying to reach. And I think it's very much about creating longer term relationships with organizations so that you can be constantly improving. Because a big challenge for us, certainly with Cosford, is it's 150 miles north of where we're based. And so the logistics behind all of that, bearing in mind we had a film crew there was, Conrad and the team. I mean, there was 8 of us. Nick came up as well. I think there's probably a total of 9 of us in total from all over the country. So there's lots of logistical challenges around that. And you need organizations. I think we need organizations that we've worked with in the past, that we've got a good working relationship, who are, sounds like a bit of a silly thing to say, but not just going to do what you tell them to do, that they will actually, have you thought about this? Coming back to my tabletop gaming moment, that obviously lived with me for quite a while. But I think that's important, that the organizations that have got expertise, or individuals that have got expertise, that we facilitate that rather than dictate to.
So, Conrad, then it looks like you were the one who brought in the, I'm not bigging you up or anything, but it kind of brought in the idea of the wargaming to the company of makers.
Yeah, I mean, originally it was just Steve wanted some ideas for the survey to find out a bit more information, and then we sort of started talking about, well, how can we do this? Can we do it online? Can we do it through a podcast? How do we discuss it? And it was like, well, let's put an event together. Even if it's just a small event, which we did last year at the Army Flying Museum in last May. And it was that was the sort of experiment. And then we started looking for more venues, and ended up with the RAF Museum at Cosford, and that sort of exploded. I mean, if we'd cleared the hangar, we probably could have filled it the way it was going. It was almost we've only got so much space, and if you see pictures of some of the fantastic boards, and dioramas, and they brought out. I mean, there's one guy absolutely amazing, 7 tables long, Omaha Beach in
Charles Roundtree.
Charles Roundtree, absolutely,
absolute legend. Legend.
I mean, an awesome layout. I mean, the guys that from Shrewsbury that brought the castle with them. I mean, apparently it was only half the castle. It was still 8 foot by 8 foot. But yeah, I mean, it sort of developed from there, because we sort of looked at it and went, well, we can try and do it with just veterans, but actually part of this whole scenario is, as Steve says, is getting the community, you might have a veteran or two that's sort of in an area where there aren't other veterans, but you wanted to introduce them to a club. I mean, the Veterans Wargaming Association, I didn't even know that existed until sort of 2 years ago, even though I was wargaming. I'm a veteran. It just hadn't even popped up on my radar. They've been great. They've come in. They've just said that they've upped their membership, because exposure at our events and other events has helped them bring people in. It's achieving the objective. I just enjoyed it. It's a lot of work from the team and from our side, getting it all out there and organising it. But the reward is far, well worth it, should we say? So
when Conrad says it's a lot of work, he's referring to the daily deluge of emails from me.
Yeah, I've got Steve on a friends and family plan for emails. I think.
You need to charge him by the letter.
He couldn't afford it.
Slow it down.
I tell you, it would slow him down though, but he couldn't afford it.
Oh, brilliant! Just what you mentioned, the castle there, and a cautionary tale. This from many years ago, which always makes me laugh. There was a Wargames group in the Channel Islands, actually, who were bringing a game to, I think it was Salute, and they brought this huge castle set up in the back of a van, and of course they go through customs and they get stopped. And the customs guys are just like, "What the fuck is this?" It's like, "Oh yeah, it's a huge castle. We're gonna do this, that, and the other." And obviously, the custom guy just went, "Yeah, right, yeah, whatever." So he decides to get his drill out and drill into the terrain where the castle's built on. And of course, what comes out? A load of white powder. So there was some very worried wargamers in the customs cells for a number of hours while tests were carried out. But safe to say they made it to the show. But I think that was in the 80s. It was one of my favourite wargames. So just a reminder for everyone out there: if you are taking a castle overseas, make sure you clear it with customs first, because you could get into trouble.
Or if you're smuggling in a diorama, don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those Mexican drug lords have submarines, don't they? Where they can bring the stuff in. So maybe we need. There's an idea, Steve, for a company of makers. You can have your own submarine and import dodgy war games.
Well, a good friend of ours is a former submarine captain, so I'll get him onto that.
Oh,
He'd be delighted.
I didn't think of that. We're in the right company, aren't we?
Yeah.
It's a bit like Ocean's 11, this, isn't it? We've all got our individual skills.
And you're blowing the cover on the fact that
Yeah, I can say
the entire wargaming world is actually a massive cover-up for international narcotics machine.
I think it's more like Dockside 4 than Ocean's 11.
Well, they do call it plastic crack, don't they? The sprues and stuff. So there we go. We're given the anyway. We've got half of MI5 listening to this show now, which is really good.
That's increased your audience.
Boost the audience. Tend to mention Russia and oligarchs every now and again, just to increase the viewership. So Nick, you got involved through this questionnaire.
Yes.
And just tell us a bit about this game that you're putting together then, Fox Sounds, which is kind of being helped along by the company.
Yes, it's so the game's called Fox Hounds. Had it out on a table at Salute this weekend, just gone. It's a hex-based war game. The current rendition has sort of near future, early sci-fi models on it. They're 6mm models, and it was written to answer off a couple of questions, really, or to sort of face down a challenge and to sort of meet my own tastes. I wanted to be sort of my contribution to this whole world, really. But I think that there is a need for some quick play stuff out there, and there is a lot of quick play stuff out there, but. I think there's one of the challenges wargaming as an institution has is that a lot of stars need to align for you to get a game. So, like you may like Italians in puffy pants, Ken, I might like World War II. So that's us not playing. We may like the same era and have different scales. We may like the same era and the same scales and have different rules. And I think what can bring people together in those circumstances are those quick, easy to learn games with minimalist rules, and of course those have the side benefit of bringing youngsters into the hobby. And I think there's sort of an age divide in the hobby between essentially those in school and those with more of that sort of veteran status who've been in communities for a long time. So there's that sort of that accessibility is one thing about it, and the other is it has some mechanics in it that really force you to ask yourself, what am I asking from my troops? Whenever I've played war games, I've sort of tried to put myself in a position of a commander and go, who am I pushing too hard? Who's rested, and sort of try and keep that balance between teeth and tail in my force. I suppose that's my play style, really, but not all games require that. I think there are a lot of games out there where you can run someone from one end of the table to the other, and it'll be very much the same dude at the end of it as they were at the beginning.
Perfectly fresh, not even sweating.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that wasn't my experience of service. I always found it extremely strenuous. But so that's the sort of personal taste thing. It's got an endurance factor to it that I think a lot of games already have. I could point to the shock mechanic in some of the Lardy rules and that sort of thing, which works extremely well. But even that is mostly predicated on enemy action. But anyway, whilst in danger of waffling, the idea is it's a pickup game with an inbuilt focus on endurance and cohesion, and all condensed into the simplest rules I can manage, and hopefully, as I was reading John Lamshed's 1 hour skirmish wargame rules the other day. It's just a really good bedtime read. I quite like it as a book. But there's a gold plated quote in the foreword of it that says, "Remember, chess is simple but never facile." And I do like finding those games that have that simplicity, but are still full of tactical challenge. And if it can make your brain hot, it's a good game, basically. So I was aiming for.
Yeah. And what sort of level of action is it? Are you controlling a small group of men like a section, or are you going kind of a platoon level, or are you making higher level command decisions?
Yeah, I'd call it company minus, really. So, a stand of 6mm soldiers being a squad, a tank being a tank, and you tend to have 7 to 10 units on the board at any given time.
Oh, excellent. Well, good luck with that. And how did the play testing or the playing at Salute go?
So I think it went well. It was very enjoyable. Playtesting with a company of makers before has involved a couple of mates and some people that the network have brought in, which sort of naturally put them on a footing where they're there and they wanted to support me, which is wonderful in one respect, but in unhelpful in another. In that you need that honesty. I remember there was one particular guy that came to the first playtest who had the sort of the integrity to go, Nick, do you know what your problem is? What is it, Andy? He's the assault bit. It just isn't fun. I was like, thank you. So those moments are really important. I think it's. I don't know if anyone listens to the Rule of Carnage podcast, but they have a quote where they say, playtesting is the art of kicking your baby until it bleeds awesome, which is, in one respect, a really horrible thing to say, but also absolutely true. So you need to. But really, Salute was taking it to a different, not to a different level, but a different mode, really, where I sort of had people who had no connection to the game before, hadn't heard of it, hadn't seen it, and saying to them, do you fancy a cabbie? Sit down and practice the teach and see if we could get them into the headspace to enjoy a game. Very pleased to say there was a slack handful of people that not only played, but really sort of saw it through. The last game in particular,
good
start to finish, with lots of hilarity. So yeah, lots of fun.
And just Steve, we'll just have a quick chat for a minute about some of the other things that the company of makers do. And you mentioned podcasts, something I might be a bit familiar about. And you've done some recently focusing on Ukraine, and then you did a series a year or so ago about Afghanistan. So what is your podcast looking to do? What the people you're bringing on, what you're trying to get from that?
So when in doubt, run 2 separate podcasts, I think is a quick answer to that. So the Afghanistan podcast is the latest season that we've done since the lockdown. So we've basically done a season a year, and we started by who do we know that we can get on to have a chat? There was no sort of if they served in the armed forces. Excellent, right? Let's have a chat. And that was really in response to what our funders said to us, which was, when the lockdown happened and we're all cowering in our houses, not knowing what on earth is going on, they basically came to us and said, okay, what are you going to do? And it was like, you're asking us. But I'm very interested in music. I used to make a lot of music when I was younger. Rachel used to work in TV. So we felt pretty confident that, our spontaneous response of podcast was the good one. But it morphed after, on season 3, we started to change things, and that each season would become about a specific subject. So it became a far more, I'll say, earnest affair in terms of it's talking about people's lived experience, usually in combat or on deployment. So we've done the Falklands. We did the Battle of the Atlantic with 4 guests. I think the total age was about 375 of the 4 guests.
Good effort.
And there was some stories being told there that definitely they hadn't been told before. I think it was fair to say. We did Iraq, Optelic, and Afghanistan, as you've mentioned, and those are all talking about people's lived experiences and the very serious experiences in some cases. But it's not just serving. We've had partners. We had in the Falklands, we had a lady who was a young mum at the time of the invasion. So we're trying to approach it, shall we say, not necessarily just the great and the good coming on the podcast. We want to know, to use the Navy phrase, below the deck plates, the ordinary, if there is such a thing, person who serves in those deployments. In parallel to that, we'd been running a series of online talks, as we called them initially, which started with a whole series of war art talks and about creating a discussion of war art through the years. That has more recently, we've kind of shifted that into what we call On the Line, which is a video podcast. So that's done live and is streamed live to YouTube, as well as being a webinar. And the subjects in there really, I mean, best compliment I've had about that is it's very eclectic, but I enjoy it.
No, that's good. That's good.
So I wouldn't say, we do current affairs, as you've alluded to with Ukraine, but we had 3 episodes working with Commando Comics about how do you draw for a comic,
Love them.
write
Love
for a
them.
comic, yeah,
Love them.
and produce a comic. We've also had photography, and there are the perennial favorites, special forces, spies, Cold War. If you're looking at it from a history perspective, those would be the areas that we focus on. But again, coming back to our sort of driver is around, creativity and its power upon people's well-being, hearing from authors, whatever the subject, or people who are involved in the creative industries. And I include gaming when I say that. If there is a DNA that runs through it, that is it, quite strongly, I would say. So it's very much things that we think people will be interested in, but also something that I've got some knowledge of, because it's very difficult to host a podcast that you know nothing about. Although apparently we can do that with a gaming project, it would seem.
Yeah. I've done it for 4.5 years. You're all right. Don't worry.
Okay, thank you very much. It's good to have a bit of reassurance from a fellow podcaster. And the workshops, again, responding to what happened with COVID, we jumped online, started with drawing, writing, and photography. So pencil and paper, pen and paper, and a phone with a camera, you were in. That has gone on to include various forms of art, poetry, guitar, storytelling, all sorts of different kind of creative endeavors. And drawing's one of those ones that's quite interesting, because even if you're talking, say, a piece of war art, or whether you're talking the latest AAA video game, they all start with a pencil and paper or something very similar. And I think that kind of the innate nature of mark making, if you want to use the artistic phrase, is very important. And I dare say, when Nick started working on his game, it was about scribbling things down on a notepad and what ifs and if I do that. So I think
Crayons.
there's always a link between all these things. And I think and that's what's led us to the idea that we're very interested in the business of wargaming, because that's where a lot of, I'm not saying playing a game's not creative, but that's where a lot of the creative industries kind of meet, or creative endeavors meet. So whether it's model painting or writing rules, it matters not to us. I think there's creativity going on there at all times. So yeah, do 2 podcasts, do some workshops, and I suppose mapping that model onto what we do at the events. So we want stuff. One of the criticisms we had from Cosford was there weren't enough shops, which again I took as a compliment because it was deliberate. We didn't want to have 50 exhibitors all just selling stuff. We wanted stuff that was interactive, that people could get involved in, because fundamentally the way we do this is we just put on something we hope is cool and interesting. That creates the opportunity to have a discussion with people, and then you might be able to help people if indeed they need help. We don't sort of say, do this photography workshop, it'll fix your mental health, because frankly that's nonsense. But we will say, come and do a photography workshop because it's something that you might find interesting. And it leads to all sorts of different things. Sometimes we do go the full 9 yards helping people, but that's also how I met Conrad. It's you just don't know who's going to be in that network. And I think taking the time to get to know people a little bit has an awful lot of value. And it's something I don't think we always do in this day and age. It's very, very easy to sort of shut yourself off. Technology is a great enabler, and I'm quite a big fan of technology, but let's be honest, if you wanted to isolate yourself from the rest of the universe, technology will help you do that.
Well, it certainly will. I think friendship is one of the most important things I've found as part of the wargaming hobby. There are people who I've been in really difficult work situations with for many, many times that are no longer friends, where you would think those things would bring us together. Yet people I was pushing toy soldiers around with when I was 12 and 13 are still my best friends. So there is a connectivity with the hobby.
It's funny you should mention that, Ken, because I was talking at the Cosford event to somebody, and I said, years and years ago, my friends, we did D&D together, we did some wargame together, I moved around, but we got back together. Oh, computers, but it meant taking your computer to somebody's house in those days. And then the broadband got better, and the computers got more complicated. We tended to move away from it, and we can chat online, we can play the games online, and it was like, that wasn't the point. The whole point was we got together, and literally not 2 weekends ago, I did exactly that. We sat and played some board games and a couple of games with a friend of a couple of friends. We tried to try and do it twice, 3 times a year. We've gone full circle back to actually the whole point was to sit there with your friends, chat about stuff, have a pizza or a Chinese on one of the nights we stay over, and enjoy the company. And as an actual interaction with somebody the wargaming is almost a secondary thing to that friendship. And it was a realization that, we still do play the online games, but that's not the point of it. The point is get in there with your friends and having face to face.
So one of the videos that I watched this morning, you popped up on, Conrad. Did you volunteer in the true military way of everyone stepping back when you were still stood still? Or
can I say it's called voluntold, and he was so pleased to do it.
Between Rachel and Steve, I just got sweet talked into it. It's more Rachel, I have to say, but it was important to me. I found the first one we'd run. Actually, in the production level from the video and stuff, they can only do so much with Photoshop, though, I'm afraid. But it was important to me to get that message across a little bit as well about why I enjoyed the wargaming, what it was all about. But I volunteer for these things. I throw myself into it and probably do far more on it than I should do. But that's part of the enjoyment. I know for a fact Steve does the same. I'm sure Nick, there's a lot more that we do on the background that we just think is just part of being what we do. Yeah, so I enjoyed it.
So just before we finish this section off then, Steve, where do you see Company of Makers are at the moment? Are you kind of just starting? Are you in a growth stage? Whereabouts are you in the progression of Company of Makers?
So I guess Company of Makers at the moment, as a whole organisation, is I can't believe I'm about to say this, a fairly mature organisation in the sense that we've been going for 11 years. We know how to do certain things very well, I feel. I think the gaming has been and continues to be an adventure we're still on. This is nowhere near the finished product. As Conrad said, we did Army Flying because they in fact contacted us actually and said, would you like to host something? We thought, we'd like to give that a go. Conrad was massively involved in organising all of that. I'm understating that. He did most of it. And I think then we thought, well, what's next? Army Flying, we're going back late in May, or the 24th, I think it is, Saturday 24th.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, we obviously did Cosford, which was several orders of magnitude bigger and further away. And I think all of that is learning for us. We've run a couple of, we did a Warhammer tournament in Plymouth for 20 people. The last one was in Truro for 40. And like I said, the one in Plymouth next year is going to be north of 100 players. So we are definitely learning, but I think it's also about making sure that we're maximizing the impact and not trying to reinvent the wheel. So the Warhammer's a good example. So 20, which was the first effort, thought, this was a what is Warhammer moment for us. Men with tape measures, according to Rachel, for our listeners' benefit, if they want to know what it is. And then we did Truro, which was 40 people. And then we're doing that in the Southwest because we've worked with organizations and continue to work with organizations that are based in the Southwest. Now, whether that will then lead to further across the UK, I don't know. But we're also organising a Warhammer tournament in Glasgow, which I think is, broadly speaking, Lossiemouth versus Faz Lane, which could be quite interesting.
Drinking afterwards will be interested.
Yeah, I'm going to say that's the social's going to be fun.
So it's very much in that stage of we're trying things, see what works, and we have ideas around all of that now, whereas before I'd say it was very much suck it and see, and think, well, how do we do better how do we improve something like Cosford or improve Army Flying, improve Warhammer? We're very, very close to making an announcement on computer-based gaming as well, which will be uber cool. And I think they will all of these activities kind of resonate with different audiences. I think the most striking thing for me is the kind of the youth side of it is, you know, very much in the Warhammer universe, whereas non-Warhammer in broad terms seems to be an older demographic. And I think the kind of conversations we're having is, what is the future of wargaming? Will those younger players continue to play Warhammer for the rest of time, or will they start playing other games? And if so, what are they? Why aren't they all going to be playing Foxhounds, for example? Can we get them to do that? Don't know. We've got, I'd say, a lot of questions rather than answers, but it's very much, you know, if any of your listeners have got any ideas, then we're keen to hear them. But we're still in the learning phase, I think is fair to say.
Excellent to hear. It's one of those questions that I remember when I was like 13 or 14, going around the shows, and everyone saying, "Oh, the hobby's going to die. Oh, you know, it's all old men with grey hair playing Napoleonics." And here I am, aged 57, still playing the game and listening to everyone going, "The hobby's going to die. It's all grey," and it's now me that's grey. Thankfully, it's all still here, but it's I am grey.
Ken, I think the point about that Conrad, I think, mentioned earlier about when you've got, what was it, 30 different rule sets to play World War II or something like that. I think there's an inherent complexity to starting out as a war gamer, which I think in many ways can put people off. And I think if I was to describe the problem, that is something we would be interested in trying to help to solve, in terms of, so if you, like Conrad, I think, said also that, you know, many people have gone to join the Veterans Wargaming Association, and of course they play lots of different games. But I think, what does the future of wargaming, tabletop gaming, look like? And, you know, is that something we could or should be involved in? I think is a little challenge for us, rather than just doing the same thing over and over and over again. Because, you know, whilst I guess we could do that, we obviously don't have an objective of just putting events on. We're trying to support those that have served or are serving in the armed forces, and this is a way of bringing people together.
Yeah, it's been a problem that's been around for a long time, and yeah, referred to as herding cats or plaiting fog. It's just a nightmare, because there's so many different people involved in so many different periods of history with different rules and different scales. And it's one of the problems. You know, I've spoken to people in the past who have tried to set up a wargaming shop, and you've got to decide, right, I'm gonna do Napoleonics. Brilliant, Ken. Right, what scale are you going to do? Oh, fuck. Are you going to do early Napoleonics? Or are you going to do late Napoleonic? Well, are you going to use black powder? Are you going to use general, and just all these problems? And it is one of the difficult problems, to keep people interested in the cycle, because there isn't, you know, if you play a sport, for example, there's usually an overarching governing body, Professional Darts Corporation or whatever, or the ICC for cricket. There isn't anything for wargaming. So there's nobody trying to push an agenda. You've just got people like yourselves who are trying to do it for benefits to people. There are companies who are trying to sell you things, but their thing, not the thing that everyone does. So it's a cracking problem, Steve. And to be fair, after 71 podcasts, I still haven't solved it. So we're struggling there, mate. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take another short break for the audience, and then we're going to come back and we're just going to widen out the subject and come back around full circle and talk about how veterans and wargaming mix together. There is a plan for these podcasts. I know it doesn't sound like it, but there is. Right, welcome back to the final section of the show, and we're going to talk to my guests about veterans and how they need help, what help they need, maybe some of the problems that they go through, and how veterans maybe react to wargaming. Not everybody who listens to this podcast is a veteran. Not everyone who listens to this podcast may have had any experience whatsoever with people who maybe struggle a bit in their daily life. So it's an opportunity for us to kind of highlight those topics and bring to the fore what these guys are trying to do. But what I want to do first before we do that, and this is mostly Conrad and Nick, is I don't want it to make it sound like a military career is a load of shit and you come out of it an absolute gibbering wreck and you can't do fuck all. So, Conrad, positives of a military career, young man.
Well, I've got lifetime friendships for starters. I learnt a lot of skills. I was able to indulge myself in various hobbies, find skills I didn't realise I had. Particularly for me, I got involved in target shooting early on in my career. Took me all over the world in competitions. I mean, I did tours to Africa and America. Paid for by the government. I just take my beer money. Apparently, was all I had to do. It was quite entertaining. That again gave me another bunch of friends and contacts around the world. I actually carried that on. That when I left the RAF in 2018, I am now basically the manager of the RAF shooting club down in Surrey, and still have lots of contacts across the service and shooting world. My time gave me some skills. The hardest part is probably getting yourself out of the military mindset and sort of having everything almost on your plate in front of you. I think it took a bit for me for that, but I think I was well prepared for it. But the benefits, plenty. I've enjoyed it. I look back and I think, would I do it again? Yeah, probably. Would I do some things different? Probably. Not get caught early on in my career. That's probably one of the first things. But there's all sorts of things that it's done for me and continues to do for me in a way.
Well, I've just been watching The Day of the Jackal. So, with all those skills, have you ever thought of being a hitman?
I did once fly out for a competition. Bearing in mind, my target rifle looks like something out of The Day of the Jackal. Actually, it's a alloy stock and looks quite complicated. I mean, we use it out to about 1,000 yards. And I got to the airport, and security are obviously interested with all the paperwork there. They open up this box, and the young security lady looks across and says, "Is this for business or pleasure?" And I did look and say, "What sort of business do you think I'm in?" I was like, "Don't know." Which was quite entertaining in its way. But I didn't have to mention the fact there was a whole team behind me. So there's about another 15 cases full of guns coming through the airport. So that made it quite entertaining.
Yeah, I've been watching the latest version on Netflix or wherever it is at the moment, and they're like he's getting like 10 to 50 million a shot.
Yeah,
I thought I'm in the wrong job here.
It's costing me £1.70. I've obviously gone the wrong end of it.
Oh dear. Nick, would you do it again, mate?
Yeah, of course I would. I love my time in the military. I really did. I was an infantry officer, and I spent 8 years with a sort of singularity of purpose and a level of excitement that I won't find anywhere else. That was it. It really was fantastic in that respect. Lots of skills picked up, and just in terms of having had the opportunity to make some decisions, to make some calls, and to experience people in times of hardship, fear. Sometimes all the while having an agenda, in some of the complex scenarios we faced overseas and all the rest of it. It was a fascinating and heady mix of considerations, and it definitely felt like living. And I wouldn't swap those experiences. Above all that, just to work with and have the honour to lead the soldiers that I met in the regiment. Aside from the things I love about my family, those are the things I would never trade. Those are priceless memories of doing that and being part of it. What a fantastic career and worth every recommendation. And of course, transferring to civvy life is what most people will do. We all know that it might be coming for us. I always thought I'd be a lifer, and you sort of find the one, and you think, oh, maybe I'll be a good husband and father and homeowner and all that kind of stuff as well. And the pull of that gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and sort of push for a change and you need to adjust. I'd echo what Conrad said about sort of swapping out some fruits of the military mindset. There's a requirement to carry yourself differently, but I certainly took so much from the army that I'll be forever grateful for. Yeah, overwhelming experience.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to get that in because we're going to move on now to talk about some of the negative things that happen when people come out of the army, and I think it's very important that anyone listening to this doesn't get put off by what we're going to talk about, because these things happen in other areas of work and in other jobs, and you can have a fantastic career, but have things that you carry that you maybe need to do something to alleviate and help with. So on that, Steve, then you, as kind of the runner of company of makers, who's kind of over all the various things, not just the gaming thing. Just for people out there who maybe don't know, what are the sort of problems that veterans face post-service, that when they're talking to you, when you're interacting with them, what are those issues that people come across?
I think there are physical challenges sometimes. There may be injury. There may be mental health. I mean, obviously, we hear a lot about PTSD. That is a very, very small percentage of people that we're talking about. I think most people would say that they enjoyed their career, but I think the shock of the change is not always that well prepared for, and not necessarily laying that at the individual's door. And I think also it depends on how long you were in service as well. I think people, from our experience, people who are in longer tend to transition a bit better. If they leave after a very short service, that can be sometimes more problematic, counterintuitively. But I would say that the biggest challenge that we come across is social isolation and loneliness. And that's often a manifestation of other challenges. So you've already alluded to, the fact that everything is done for you, where to be, what to wear, when to do it, how to do it, etc., etc. And that just disappears and you lose the support of the organization that you're part of. That, I think, can be very problematic. And I think also we live in a very, very complex world. You've got lots of other things going on that we're influenced by, that, people may not be. How is things like the cost of living crisis, housing crisis, all these things that you suddenly have to deal with when you leave the service. You can't get a dentist anywhere. So these are very real problems for everybody. But I think it sometimes can prove to be more challenging for those people that have served in the armed forces. And I think, why do people choose to isolate? Do they choose to isolate, or is it, what's available? I think there's often a challenge that, you may have, say, a health issue, for example, as a result of service, and you often find yourself repeating and recanting that story to multiple agencies. And I've seen this firsthand where I've supported an individual. We've gone from organization to organization on the same day, and that individual's retelling of their story gets shorter and shorter and shorter, to the point when they're actually in front of the agency they need to be in front of, they're missing out all the key salient points, literally because they are fed up with recanting it. And I think that's human nature. I don't think that's a uniquely military problem. I think we all get frustrated with that. So social isolation and loneliness, which is why we think bringing people together around creativity it kind of addresses or helps to address some of those issues. And then if there are more underlying issues or deeper issues, people will quite often drop clues to those in the workshop environment. So someone might just say, "Oh, I've been made redundant. I wasn't expecting that to happen." That if people mention things like that in the middle of a workshop, you probably think they probably want to talk about that. So we'd always email them and say, "Do you fancy a chat? Is there anything we can do to help? Is there any organizations we can point you towards?" So it's, yes, leaving the military is undoubtedly difficult in the transition, but I think people are transitioning into a much more complicated world than they were even 10 years ago. I think, technology and the sort of global environment is very, very different.
Yeah, very true. So when you left, Conrad, you'd been in for quite a considerable period of time. I think you said 34 years, did you?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, 34.
Yeah. So was that difficult because of that length of time that you'd had that kind of what I call discipline service?
Yeah, my mother on a deathbed was worried I was going to be institutionalized, which at the 32-year point was probably a bit too late.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is a structure and an order. You know, I spent 16 years in M and 18 odd years as an officer, doing all sorts of different things. And you do get into, you've got a support network around you in a way. You've got friendships and a little bit of a shared understanding of experiences, and sometimes the sense of humour and things that come out about it. And sometimes you step out into the outside world and you say something, and people just look at you as if to say, "What the earth are you talking about?" I remember having a conversation with a former colleague of mine, and my civilian friend next to me said, "I understood good morning. The rest of that was absolute complete gibberish to me, but to us it was exactly, it was military speak. It's what you did." For me, the decision for me was long and complicated. And as Nick said, family suddenly comes into light, and you think, oh, it's time to settle down. I thought after 34 years, it's probably time I settled down. People forget the hardship your family faces. I mean, my wife's career not stalled, but was struggling because every time she got to a point of promotion in her job, I moved. My son had been in 4 different houses by the age of 5, and I wanted him settled in education. All these things that sort of pop up in the world, and you think, oh great, I'm going to come out into a nice stable world, and all that's going to happen, and suddenly you find, oh, actually, I'm in a bit of an unfamiliar environment. Now, I was lucky. I mean, I had good resettlement courses, which not everybody gets and takes. That's improved massively over the years. I mean, there's transition workshops and all sorts of things. And the actual career transition has improved fundamentally by leaps and bounds over the last 25, 30 years. But, it's stepping out into a world where I've got civilian friends, and thankfully they've known me through my service and I've kept in touch with them. But you might go back to your hometown because that's where your parents are there or your family's there, and you go to the old pub that you used to go to, and none of your friends have got that shared experience. You feel isolated by definition because they can't understand why you were serving in Afghanistan. I mean, I did 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. I was air attaché in Kabul in 2013, working in the places that I watched being taken back on the news.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually did impact me quite a bit. I didn't think it would impact me as much as it did. But seeing that and trying to explain that to my friends, having seen all the work that we'd done to get to where we were literally disappear in the space of days, actually impacted my mental health quite a bit. And as I know it did a lot of other veterans. The thoughts that there was Afghans that I'd worked with whose lives were now in jeopardy and there was nothing I could do about it. How to explain that to your civilian friends? Because they're like, well, but how does that affect you? Well, because they were people I've worked with, because there's something I'm connected to it, and that break of that connection is very difficult. And I feel that stepping out of the forces for some people, that's a break of connection. They might go home. I've got a colleague who's left the army. He's gone home to his parents because that's sort of all he can do. For him, that's a massive step backwards.
Yeah.
He's been a senior NCO, lived his life, been in charge of people under combat, under high stress situations, and he's now living back with his mum and dad while he gets his life sorted out.
Yeah, very very difficult situation.
Throw in that a lot of people I know in the last few years since I left have come out straight into COVID. Actually stepping into a world pandemic, which I'm sure we've all played the games online, was not what we quite expected. And there was no zombies for a starter, which was a shame. Well, it was for me.
I was ready for the zombies.
I was ready, but damn it, there were no zombies. But to step out into that world where you're great, I'm out. I want to get out there and do stuff. Actually, you can't. Bringing these people together at events and on these podcasts and things, to me it's giving a link to someone to step out of that isolation and out of that world. Hence, I support Steve fully when I can.
Excellent. That's really, really good to hear. And Nick, how was your transition into civilian life?
Yeah, very. I found it. I found it a very strange experience. I found everything that Conrad says is true. So I can only try and offer a couple of different angles, different perspectives. Really, I seem to remember thinking that when I sort of rolled out the gate, having handed in my ID card for the last time and taken out to world, I just literally just secured a job a couple of days before getting out, and you leave and you don't realise how invested in it you were emotionally, how much you enjoyed and depended upon the regiment, the guys, your friends, and everything that comes with it. It all sort of multiplies together. It's like when someone you sat there comfortable watching your favourite TV program and someone switches it off. You know, what the hell? It's like that times a million. It's like, hey, I was watching that. So it suddenly all just goes in the blink of an eye, and you're sort of out there thinking, right, get my suit ready and go to this job, and it's kind of it's not just the chat that Conrad pointed to. People have a very slight understanding of what military service is all about and what challenges it brings along. I remember securing my first job, which was a consulting job, and I went in at quite a low grade to get in. So I remember sitting there trying to tell them about how I'd been an advisor to the Afghan army and set up a first-in-class training experience and brought Afghan soldiers back off the line into Camp Leatherneck, which was occupied by the US Marines, negotiating with a general to get the ammunition, negotiating with the units to get their contingents there, negotiating with the US Marines to allow I think it was 18 Afghan army vehicles into the US Marine camp at a time where the insider threat was really the big deal, and then firing safely, hundreds of rounds and rockets out into the desert from Camp Leatherneck, and sort of initiating, planning, and delivering that training experience, having negotiated every single bit of it, and then sort of having my interview and putting some of that across, and they go, yeah, we're going to start you at this level because, coming from the military where it's all very structured, you won't really have any consulting skills, and you'll need to learn what that is and that sort of thing. So it's like kind of there's a huge gulf between these two worlds, and to actually translate what you've done to this interviewer is extremely difficult. So long story short, the career transition thing is very difficult to sort of find a place where you feel you're bringing your full self and full skills into a new working environment. Really, really difficult. You really need to swallow your pride and knuckle up for a bit of a voyage in that respect. I'd say missing people is pretty standard. There's that family in service that is people. I think pretty much everybody with a long-term partner or spouse who's in the army will be told at some point or other, oh, you're married to the service, or you're married to the regiment. You're like, no, I'm not, or I'm not institutionalized. I'm not married to it. You are. I think, and unless you're a rare case, and you've got to sort of decouple those bonds and build something new that, as we've touched on here, doesn't have a structure. It doesn't really exist. You just got to find your way in some bizarre entrepreneurial manner into a new life and adopt a new sort of flexibility. So whilst you're given all this chaos in the forces, you're sort of chaos ready and chaos adaptable, but rigid and institutionalized at the same time. It's really, really weird. And I'm not sure there's anything else really like it.
No worries. And just staying with Conrad and Nick just for a moment, with the veteran side of things, it can go badly wrong, can't it? People will leave the forces and, drink, relationship breakups, violence. If it's not dealt with properly. So do you guys, and I'm going to come round to Company of Makers in a minute with how that's helping, but did you guys think there's enough help out there for people, or are we as a society a long way short?
We've got RAFA, you've got British Legion, you've got Benevolent Fund, there's Army Veterans. There's a multitude of agencies out there, and I think sometimes what happens is people are too afraid to go to them because they don't think there's a problem. I've known veterans who have got into quite serious problems with their health or with their mental health. Almost their pride stops them doing it. And actually, when someone's found out about it and the agencies have stepped in to help them, a friend of mine, he suffered an injury that basically, he couldn't get access to his house. RAF Benevolent Fund stepped in and, transformed his life. The agencies are there, and sometimes it is the not understanding that you're entitled to the support that they offer. In fact, they want to offer that support to you. Even down to, I know friends who've through other things, the regimental charities that from the regiments they belong to, the fact that they've stayed in touch, or one of their old friends has found out they're in difficulties, and that regiment has stepped in for the support.
Oh, brilliant!
It's out there. It's knowing it's out there, and it's making sure it's used, supported, and directed in the right way, I think is the issue.
Yeah, I think sometimes the way that people are in the military, there is a pride, there is a sense of duty, and sometimes that acts negatively when it's time to ask for help. Is that something that you've seen, Nick?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, and also, how do you know if you qualify for support? Like what we touched on PTSD before. That is a broad term for a multitude of conditions that manifest in various ways, as far as I understand, and doesn't account for everything that might happen to someone. I'll segue straight to how I think it can sort of best be dealt with, really, to further explain. I still have on WhatsApp the best part of my rifle platoon for my first tour from 2007, and that way people not knowing whether they qualify for anything or not could just get on board and go, "Hey lads, I'm really struggling at the moment with X, Y, and Z," and it's amazing how open they'll be with their old platoon buddies, and then I can go, or my old platoon sergeant can go, "Right, well done for bringing it up. Let's talk one to one. Have you spoken to these guys? Get your internet browser open and find out what's about in their area, and start moving some pieces around the board." And it happens every so often, maybe once or twice a year. Sometimes I'll just get a text saying, "Hey boss, I think I need rewiring." I'm like, all right, and that's all I need, and then we can jump to it. But of course, not everybody stays in touch. Some people think, "Oh, I'm out now. I need to cut the apron strings, and I need to get out by myself, cut the umbilical cord, and just go and find out how to navigate this, because I'm not going to do it if I hang on to the old relationships too hard." And then they find themselves stranded. So yes, pride, but also either not knowing what's out there, or just not knowing if they're suitable for it. Am I unwell enough for this? Isn't this for the guys that are really bad? And it's hard to metricate the extent to which you think you need support. And that needs people to just not talk about it.
We'll just move on to Steve and just kind of talk around what the guys have just been saying there. And this is where you're coming in, and what kind of aspects of the military service, the comradeship, for example, is what you're trying to tap into to help these guys.
Well, for one thing's for sure, you can't recreate it. I think that's an important thing to recognise, and I think that we offer something that's different from military life, of course. I mean, myself and Rachel, don't forget, are both civilians. We haven't had that lived experience. Everything we've learned has been through people's experiences that they've shared with us. I think also coming back to the idea of when to get support, where to get support, am I ill enough, I think is a really pertinent point. I think it, particularly, veterans of more recent conflicts, they're very often married, they've got children, they've got a mortgage, they've got a job, and they will put themselves at the very bottom of that list every single time. And I think that's something that's probably, it should be too broad brush strokes, but guys are particularly rubbish at getting help.
Yeah, very true.
Such a vague generalization. I think, and that's guys in general, and that's before you've sort of been in the armed forces, shall we say, and I think that's a real challenge. And I think also, you're given information, when you leave, when you transition out, and you may be given a leaflet saying, here's all the support agencies, but you might not need that on day one of your civilian life. It might be months later, years later, and you can bet your bottom dollar you don't have that bit of paper still, or you even recall being given it, to be quite honest. So finding support, there is support out there. Undoubtedly, there's support out there, but knowing where it is once you've left and you've probably no longer got the links back into the armed forces, I think can be really, really difficult. I think there's something like 2,500 charities in the armed forces sector, from the very, very large, like the British Legion that you've already talked about, to the very, very small, kind of our kind of size. And bearing in mind, we don't count in that 2,500 because we're not a charity. So there will also be social enterprises. So yes, there's a lot of support out there. It's just you can't choose when you need the help,
Yeah.
And I think it's recognizing that you do need help is a problem, of course. And then the act of actually seeking help. These are not always easy things to do. These are usually quite serious things going on in your life. And again, our experiences is it's often other life-changing events that might be the straw that breaks the camel's back. That has nothing to do with life in the armed forces at all. So, veterans are people, and we are all, wetware, to use that phrase. We all respond to challenges in very, very different ways, and we can't. It's not a time and place of our choosing when we get poorly or need help or are struggling with life's challenges, whatever they may be.
It can be extremely difficult, can't it? To in my line of work, I see a lot of stuff that maybe I shouldn't do, and it's only when I speak to somebody outside of my profession that I start to see their eyes going, "What the fuck?" And it's only then that you realise that what you do isn't normal. And I can imagine, you guys who've seen active service, there are things that you would chat quite comfortably with somebody from the military, but you're not going to talk to Dave the Butcher down the pub about certain aspects because they just wouldn't understand it. And I think that's that comradeship and that bringing together of like-minded people is an extremely important thing to do.
Ken, it's worth saying that when anybody participates in our activities, there is no precondition to share their story or
no.
Unless someone actually wishes to. And I think that's kind of an important difference for us. So, if you're going to go to combat stress, by definition, you will have some sort of mental health challenge in your life. And I think you're going to have to talk about that. So I think the diversity within the sector is actually quite important in many ways. And we refer people to Op Courage or combat stress if they are in that level of need. But it's like I said before, I think the system is inherently complicated. And I think that acts as a form of deterrence to getting help.
Yeah, I think we had a chat, didn't we, Nick, on Saturday, and I was kind of saying that wargaming is a great leveler in terms of bringing people together who aren't necessarily from similar backgrounds and having that shared love of toy soldiers and dice and tape measures and however you play the game. It is a big thing for breaking down those barriers in between people who maybe wouldn't communicate together necessarily to have that shared thing.
Yeah, agreed. And it's play a game. Let's make some decisions competitively, cooperatively. Let's run a scenario and just let the old cog spin once again. And I think this is where Steve's organisation does really well. When you're doing that or whichever other activity it is that you love, there's that feeling of I think there's a security that comes with that puts you amongst friends very, very quickly, much more quickly than some sort of contrived activity or conversation would, and bonds form quick, and truth comes out in an easier and safer manner. I think that's always for the best.
Nick, do you need to leave us now?
Yeah, I think I do. So with apologies, we got a couple of minutes left on the clock. So it's been a fantastic experience, Ken. Thank you very much.
Lovely. Well, we'll just say goodbye to Nick then, and thank you very much for your time today. Best of luck with the Foxhounds game, and I'm very sure that we will meet. If you know Des Darky, we're going to meet again in the future, probably in a pub.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'll look forward to that. Yeah, going on mute now. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely day, and thank you so much for having us on board, Ken. It's been grand.
Thanks, Nick. Thank you, mate.
Catch you in a bit.
Brilliant. So we are back with Steve and Conrad, and there's a couple of things that I wanted to cover before we ended. The first one, I suppose, really, and for a war gamer, I think this might be quite easy to answer. But firstly, Conrad, what are the benefits or the aspects of wargaming that are good for veterans that you see?
It's getting the old, as the old grey matter, as Nick said, getting the old grey matter turning over, getting you thinking. Perhaps doing something that challenges you. I mean, as I say, with the painting and learning the rules, etc., and primarily the social contacts, whether it be with other veterans. I mean, my group of friends include a former teacher, a former IT consultant for NHS, and a building contractor, amongst others. That's just one small group. Different perspective on the world, different conversations, getting yourself out there and actually having social interaction with people of a like-mindedness. I mean, sitting around my friend's house discussing the various merits of World War II tanks of each side, or battleships versus destroyers, or how good is an American torpedo compared to a Japanese torpedo. You think, why? Why would you do it?
Yeah.
Because you love talking about something of interest. You love the challenge. You love the people that you're doing it with, because it's all about the social for me. Even if it's just sitting there painting one of my models for the future, actually finding a podcast or a YouTube video to help me about it, or asking my friends. Finding other friends that are interested in the same hobby. And as Nick said, I've got guys that I used to work for me that I didn't realise they were wargamers. When I bumped into one at Colours down in Newbury, walking around, and he went, "Hello, boss," and I was like, "What the?" Didn't realise at the time he's into wargaming. And again, connected.
That's an interesting point, actually, Conrad, because quite often I think people of our generation, it would be something that a bit like Morris dancing that maybe we wouldn't admit to.
We haven't got a secret handshake, I know that much.
But now I think people are a lot more open, and gaming is kind of. I don't want to make it sound like a bad thing and say socially acceptable, but it is. More people do it. You've got that guy who plays Superman, Henry Cavill, who does Warhammer 40k, and kids are just going, "Oh wow, this is fantastic." Whereas we would kind of maybe not say anything. You play with toy soldiers.
I mean, that'd be funny. When I was a teenager, it was not seen to be. It was you were the nerds. You were bullied for it. If that was the thing.
Yeah, that was the same for me. Yeah.
It's daft as it is nowadays, because you've got some of the big genres. Warhammer 40k and some of the other things. It is far more socially acceptable. It's far more fun. If someone turned around and said to you, Henry Cavill, that guy there, oh, he's a wargamer. Really? I wouldn't think that. He actually said, in an interview, he said, "I'll get my geek on. That's it. I love this." And it's a whole different perspective on actually who's involved in this and the interests that it gets on. I actually talked to a friend of mine, and he's involved in emergency planning, and didn't realise. I said, "Oh, so you do a bit of wargaming then?" No. Well, you do, because you run a mini exercise. You run a tabletop exercise on your emergency planning about how to deploy fire vehicles and support vehicles, and he's like, "That's not wargaming, is it?" And I was like, "Well, it is, because wargaming doesn't have to be about shooting things. It can be about exercising something." And he sort of went, "I've never thought of it in that perspective. My God, actually, there's a whole." It opened up his mind a little bit to, well, yeah, I am wargaming, and he started referring to it as wargaming, or tabletop gaming as it was, and people were like, "No, it's exercise planning. It's exactly the same thing."
So, Steve, as a kind of a creative person coming into wargaming, what aspects of it or what parts of the hobby do you see kind of bringing a fresh perspective to it, really, that is beneficial to veterans?
I think the idea that when you were at school, you were interested in some creative activity, I have no doubt about it. And then your teacher would have said, you don't want to do that. You want to get a proper job and, do maths and physics, which is exactly what happened to me. That didn't pan out too well. Got a
No.
geography O level, so that's quite good. I do think that, creativity is often educated out of us. And I think of all the people we speak to, so many of them have said that, I used to play games when I was a teenager, but I've only just restarted. I think there are lots of ways that people can get back involved in the hobby. I don't think we necessarily, and I know why you asked the question the way you did, but I don't think we necessarily need to attach a label to that. If you enjoy it and it's not causing harm to anybody, then what's the problem? I think, and I think that's where people just need to sort of give it a go. And if they have been involved in things, creative endeavors, as I say, of which wargaming is one of them, then get back in touch with it, because there's always certainly within the wargaming universe, there are lots of very vibrant communities, and for the most part, in my experience, they've been inordinately welcoming and very keen to help.
Have you found that the different aspects of the hobby make it more interesting or more difficult even to get into? I'm probably going to get shot by every single fisherman in the world here, but fishing, you just chuck a line in and fish comes out, doesn't it? It's quite simple.
Not when I go fishing, you don't.
Yeah, maybe minus the fish. What's not? Is it fishing if you don't catch anything?
Well, yeah.
That's the point. But with wargaming, you have got the modelling aspect, you've got the painting aspect, you've got the research aspect. You've got so many different parts of creativity coming together. Maybe some of it that some people don't particularly like. But is that a positive or a negative, do you think, Steve, for people coming into it to have so many bits that they can grab onto that maybe they don't want to do all of it?
I think it's both. I think it's positive and negative, really. I think it kind of also relates to the complexity of which rules do you play for which period. I think it's quite intimidating for a first timer to get into, unless you've got someone holding your hand, come along, we'll go to the club and then we'll have a beer, or whatever kind of approach people are adopting. I think, but there are so many ways. I mean, people, just paint models, even if they don't actually play the game. And that can tend to be a solitary activity. But if you're, painting a model for a couple of hours and you're really focused on it, you're thinking about nothing else. That's that kind of getting in the flow of doing something, learning new skills. It's good for your head, in so many ways. And I think, the fact that in this day and age where you can literally jump onto YouTube or Instagram and find loads of really great painters to learn techniques and skills, the library, the resources that are available to you to learn new skills in this day and age is, without comparing human history, let's be honest. So there's plenty of opportunities. I think it's how do you weld that to the stuff that Conrad's talking about, and that it involves real people, and then I do think being online with real people has a significant value, obviously, given the work we do. And if that then leads to meeting up face to face, which has certainly happened. I mean, I've had numerous Zoom calls and meetings with people I've met for the first time at the events that we've put on. So there is definitely a power to it. I do think it is a complicated world, more generally. But I think, it's just about finding your tribe, isn't it? It's about finding the community or the subject that interests you, and if sort of 90% of the wargaming world is currently Warhammer, so be it. Obviously, Henry Cavill is just too good looking to be a wargamer. That's the reality. If the viewers could see what I could see, that is.
I say, speak for yourself, Steve.
No, it's different people take different aspects of the hobby as kind of their primary role in it. I have always said that the painting is the main aspect for me. I can just come home from some of the shite that I've seen at work, and I can just switch off completely and start thinking about the colour of cuffs on Prussian landwehr. When if I didn't, I'd be starting to think about which of the many selections of single malt whiskey that I've got available. Which one to dive into. So it can be an amazing thing.
We've had people say that to us. Why do they enjoy Warhammer? They're playing in a tournament all day long on a Sunday. Literally, it will keep me out the pub. And that's a very simple example of how it's beneficial. But also by being at that tournament, they're going to meet new people. And I think that's really, really important. And I think Warhammer in particular, it got a major boost as a result of the lockdown, and so many people have said to us, I got back into wargaming through Warhammer. It may not have been what they were playing when they were younger, but that's a really interesting narrative, and a lot of people have stayed with it because they can see that it's not just about playing the game; it's all the stuff that goes around it as well.
Yeah,
it's a lot more accessible nowadays as well. I think, Ken, is the big thing. I mean, I live a mile away from Warhammer World.
Oh, right, okay.
It's if it's but I don't do Warhammer 40k. I like it. I mean, I like some of the figures. My son wants to paint the figures. My brother-in-law's painting the figures because it's there. It is so popular. It's great. And as Steve says, if it's an entry level that gets you into it because it's accessibility, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
If your genre is the War of the Roses, and you want to paint those figures, well, you're going to have to do a bit more work to find it. And it could, if that was the only game available, I might put you off. But accessibility, you've got Warlord Games throwing out, Flames of War. It's not their game, is it? I mean, they've got Blood Red Skies. There's all sorts of games out there that have got attraction to a multitude of people that are readily available. And I think, as Steve said, there was a massive increase during lockdown. I think people were going, how can I stop myself strangling the children and the wife when I'm stuck in the house with them all day? I know, I'll order some figures online and we'll get a basic board game or a basic war game and get into it. It set things off. It's always going to be there's going to be difficulties in anything you start, but there's so much more accessibility to it now. And we tried to find the weekend to do Cosford. And one of our traders has got 40 shows this year across the country. 40 shows.
Yeah, it's a lot.
That's just insane. And these are not little tea room things. These are massive shows with hundreds, thousands of visitors and traders and games on. The hobby is just enormous. I mean, at whatever level you want to jump into it, whatever level you want to get involved, just as you say, if it helps you by coming home and painting some figures in the evening, or you go out and you go to a local club, or you just go to some of the events and meet new people, the benefits are massive.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, one of the things I always say to people trying to get into the hobby is try and find that club. The sort of things that company makers are doing, bringing people together, because quite often it's that person you sit next to in your first game, and if they're positive, if they're enthusiastic, if they're helping you through, then it's a lot easier to get into. I always remember. And you probably will, Conrad, as well. The older people back in the day who would sit there and play Ancients WRG 4th edition or whatever, and they'd all look exactly the same. They'd all look like some ancient history professor with a long beard and glasses, and they'd all be puffing on a pipe. And you go, "Oh, that's really interesting. What's that?" And they'd go, "Fuck off."
Yeah. Yeah.
It
was hard to break into it in many cases.
It was. I think it's a lot better today.
Yeah. I mean, the openness of the people. I mean, Steve will back this up. Of the welcoming of people at the Cosford event. Of people, we had people that would just come to visit the museum, wandered over, and 10 minutes later they're playing a game.
Oh wow!
Actually got into it, and the kids are there, and the kids are loving it. And you can see some of the dads going, "Oh Christ, it's going to cost me money." It's like it's but they were fascinated, and there was people just, what's this? Guys who'd come along, got an interest in one particular bit, came along and went, "Do you know what? I quite enjoy the look of this. I might try something different. I didn't realise it was that easy, or there was that much variety." It can grab you at any level you want to, quite honestly. as I keep going back to it, it's the social aspect of it. The fact that nowadays I find if you sit down at a table, as you say, someone will go, right, have you had a thought about this? No. Your character needs to do this. Please don't do this. That's the silliest thing you could do. Try that for a bit of a thing. Never trust your dice, all those sort of things. There's all sorts of that goes on about it. I can only say it's there for everybody to get hold of. I'm enthusiastic. I mean, I don't play anywhere near as many games as I'd like to be honest. I do a lot of the painting, a lot of prep work, and I sit there and I go, right, I might actually get to play a game once in a while. I'm too busy organising events for Steve as well. That's the problem.
And that's not going to change anytime soon, Conrad.
Thanks.
So just if you bear with us, Steve, just for 1 second, I'd like to do something that I do regularly on the show with Conrad, and that's called the Venn diagram of wargaming. I put together wargamer, painter, collector, historian, and I just asked people, how do those bits of the wargaming Venn diagram fit together for you?
A lot more painting than I am gaming.
Yeah.
I play Wings of Glory and board games with my friends because it's all prepared. You don't have to paint anything. So lots of painting. They all look good. Never get out on the table as much as I'd like. Historian, yeah, I love it. I do it for work as well. I belong to one of the oldest sports associations in the RAF. And as Steve will show, we've got an archive of information going right back to the 1920s, which I'm slowly but surely pulling together. I've always loved military history, and history of all sorts. And I love the idea of if I'm going to get something on a table, it's going to look right. It's going to be quite right. But I also like this is how this battle was fought. What would have happened had that force arrived in time? Or if this force hadn't been available, or actually if they developed that vehicle a year earlier with a better gun, etc., what would have happened? So whilst I love history, I also like to challenge the history. What was the other one? There was a history
collector.
Yeah, ask my wife about that one. The question I often get when I'm painting anything is, where's that going to go?
Yeah.
I mean,
I can tell you a story, Conrad, that you can tell to your wife that will let her know that you aren't that bad. I have a friend who had to have his ceiling reinforced because of the weight of the figures in his Wargames room.
And I say, in the days of lead, the old lead figures, I can imagine that. But
yeah. So you could say to your missus, "I ain't that bad, love."
Yeah, it won't work. Trust me, Ken.
Not.
On a scale of 1 to 10 with her, it's with Wargaming, it's a 10. But
is it a 10?
Yeah.
Do you have a big collection of figures?
Yeah, I've got. Probably about 60 or 70 vehicles for Team Yankee, and about 20 odd for World War II. A couple of boxes of aircraft, and they all pack away in a box. I've got a few on display above me on the shelf, all the aircraft up there because I quite like those.
What I find is when your kids grow up and go to university, you could use their bedrooms.
Yeah, problem is my son's he's just gone up to 13 and has got a growing Lego and Nerf gun collection.
Can he not be one of them child prodigies who goes to university early?
No. He's very clever in many things, but he's not going to university early.
Is he not? Oh, bless him.
Shame he's not a Sheldon. But no, even he has enjoyed a couple of games with us. We play board games as a family. And get those going together. It's a hobby for me. It's an interest. I sort of I think if it was weighed out, I think I'm probably more painting and history rather than collector. So that's sort of the way it weighs out. I don't think I'm quite as bad as my wife thinks I am. I like to think so anyway.
Very good, very good. It's always interesting to go through that with fellow wargamers because you get some people who are just purely gamers.
Yeah,
and they're not bothered about the painting and the history and the research. You just want to get stuff on table.
I'm still at the stage though when it comes to 100th scale infantry. If they're grey, they're German. If they're green, they're American. That's about it.
That sounds good enough to me. That sounds good enough to me. We've had a lovely chat today. There's a couple of things I just want to kind of cover off before we go and wrap up. And the first one really is how do you feel, Steve, about war as a game? Certainly, when I was younger, I remember, if you wanted to start a war game club at school, and I think that might even be the case today, there would be somebody who would think you were being militaristic or warmongers or however you want to say it. So how does it sit with you as war as a game?
Crikey, that's a bit of a profound question, isn't it?
I'm glad he's asked you first, Steve.
Yeah, like how can I waffle my way out of this one? I think the fact that war exists means it will be a game. I mean, it's inextricably linked, isn't it? Because wargaming, I don't know, the Prussian general or chap who was allegedly invented modern wargaming, but you bet your bottom dollar Romans war games. They must have done.
Oh,
You
yeah.
can't be that organized and not wargame. And I think the thing is, if you separate the two out, I mean, gaming, is a form of play, and that's how we learn. We learn by copying through play. And I think that's also how you probably learn how to play games better. So I think, wargaming as a tool in the armed forces community, as we've already alluded to, and many other communities in this day and age, is very important. I don't have a strong opinion either way. I think, how many ex-service personnel play Call of Duty? It's probably incredible. Or serving personnel play Call of Duty. Is gaming bad for you? Is it good for you? There is precious little research that answers that question. I might add that when we were at Cosford, we're working with Bath University and University of West England, which is Bristol, and we were conducting research interviews about the benefits of tabletop gaming. So there will be a paper coming out.
Brilliant!
As a result of that. So, might I defer the answer to the research paper? I don't know. I don't hold strong opinions about it, but we are very keen to be able to articulate what the benefits are. And I don't think is there, certainly there are videos, aren't there, that are on YouTube where, the fact that the military is making more and more extensive use of wargaming as part of its operations, is that impinging upon gaming communities, which quite often are not well inclined to the military, perhaps, because they come from a kind of different part of society. I think we all have to find our own place. And, if you want to be involved in a community like that, or if you hold strong opinions, it might not be for you. But I think, wargaming doesn't have to be, Warhammer is a war game, but it couldn't be more unbelievable in its subject matter if you tried. So it takes many, many incarnations. And I think lumping all those different rule sets and periods as one thing is very difficult. It's like a community does exist, but of course there are like many communities and many tribes within all of that. So if you enjoy it, as long as it's not hurting anybody else, then what's the harm?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, in my experience, I know of organisations who have applied for things like council licenses and stuff like that as an historical research organisation rather than a wargaming organisation, because sometimes people can see a negative connotation in that.
I think things are changing, Ken. I would say things are changing a lot. I think, we've talked about Henry Cavill. We've talked about, geek is cool. We are in a very, very different world in this day and age. And I think, when we originally suggested this idea to, the RNRMC, our funder, we were talking to at the time about the idea of using gaming, there was absolutely a bit of an educational sales pitch going on here. What's the value of gaming for those in the armed forces? Because there are gaming, be it on, computer gaming or tabletop gaming, there are stereotypes from those that don't play those games. So yes, there was a hearts and minds battle on our part to say, well, whether you like it or not, there are 6 billion gamers on the planet. No, they're not all war gamers, but I can tell you now, a lot of those games will involve war and conflict.
People forget that the most basic game, chess, is a war game. Your knights and your king and queen are going out and attacking and taking killing the opposite pieces. It's a formalized strategy game that developed from the Roman games with dice or with pieces, or from Viking games they've found. The genre has moved on. The fact that people want to put a challenge together as a tabletop game that happens to be portrayal of a war of some sort, historical or otherwise, I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a way of saying, well, actually, it's the ultimate challenge, isn't it? Conflict is always going to be the ultimate challenge.
So if you think about pop culture in general, conflict is often at the core of it, whether it's conflict between individuals or groups. But, the Veterans Wargaming Association running a version of Tron's light cycles.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that a war game? People, don't survive going through somebody else's light trail. So, I think it's a very different world than just miniatures playing Waterloo, which I think is the stereotype that people think of with wargaming.
And partly why, when with all the discussions, is we call it tabletop gaming, because it can be a lots of different things. I mean, one of the groups was going to do a scenario based on Dash for the Helicopter, like the last scene of the film Predator.
Okay,
the Wild West scene we had, sort of gunfighters and the thing. All of these are different versions of the game. I mean, I play a couple of board games. Some of them are about trading. They're literally about the trading aspect of it. There's trade wars at the moment, but the whole point is it's about a challenge with an objective and a tactics or a method of getting that result. And the tactics and the methods can change depending on the way you approach it. And I think once you get that in your head, that any game of any sort, it's just what you choose to portray it with, in my mind, is the difference. We all enjoy the fact of testing history against reality, or just science fiction against whatever you want to do. A mental challenge against another person using a structured system of points and figures and representations. That's what it comes down to me.
Yeah, no, good point. And one of the things that people from outside the hobby say to me, and one of the questions that we're kind of just going to finish off now on from that, is how people feel about wargaming modern conflicts. So conflicts that are either ongoing now, like Ukraine, or conflicts that yourself, Conrad, and Nick have been involved in, like Afghan. And sometimes people who are civilians are a little bit wary about whether that would, and obviously everybody's different, but that veterans would react badly to that, and that things that are outside of human memory are a little more free game.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. There certainly can be a trigger. There certainly can be a trigger. I mean, there's lots of things that can trigger off someone who's been in various situations. But sometimes it's also a way of resolving it.
Yes. Yeah.
It might come down to, if you're portraying something you've done, it might be, if I've done it slightly different, could I have done it worse? Could I have done it better? Is there something I prepared for that I never got to do? There's all sorts of aspects to it. I mean, don't get me wrong. There certainly can be some very, very triggering aspects of reliving those moments. But that's a choice that you can make. It might be, and I'm no mental health expert. It might be that that's the way you face your demons. You get someone and someone says, you didn't do anything wrong. This is how it would have happened. This is what you did. Or you just get a chance to go through something and, actually it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Yes, I lost friends, but that's what's happened. Actually, we got away with more than we could have done. All sorts of aspects of it. Current warfare, yeah, it's always going to be controversial because there's real people involved in that sort of thing. The point of wargaming in the military is to learn to prevent that. I found it interesting when we were doing these war games for logistics purposes. People were doing things and you're going, well, if you've done that, you've just lost all the supplies. They haven't done it for real, thankfully. No one's at the other end suffering it. There's no one stood there in a field, as we had one situation where there's no tents, no food, nothing. A couple hundred troops, they've arrived first. None of the infrastructure's there. Oops.
Yeah.
You now trained a commander to think, that step above it all. Modern war games, yeah, even ancient war games. I mean, I think MOD Doctrine talks about the Boer War and runs through the same scenario 20 or 30 times in different variations. They key back to the and it was a recent program about the submarine wargaming and how they developed the anti-U-boat.
That was
fantastic
very good
program.
Very good.
You know, and even my wife sat there was fascinated by the fact that this is how they did it. This is the simple way they taught people how to win the real conflict by actually not risking risking the lives of their troops, training commanders to be better at what they do to achieve the objective.
So Steve, then when you've run these things, these workshops, etc., and the gaming day, have you how have you found veterans of modern conflicts then? If they see something like that, is it something you've come across? Are they getting engaged with it, or do you kind of need to, I don't know, look after them a bit more and maybe direct them somewhere else?
Well, we're prepared for that possibility, but it hasn't happened.
It hasn't happened.
So, and I think also that may be so far, and touch wood and all that, because obviously we don't want it to happen. But I think it probably goes to some way, to a degree, to explaining why fantasy wargaming is very, very big in the armed forces community. So you can still learn and play skills and be with your mates, what have you, without having to sort of sit there and discuss what your next operational deployment is going to be, for example, or what your last operational deployment was. So I think, can it be triggering? Yes, Conrad's 100% right. Of course it could. But I also think there are a lot of benefits to playing games in all their incarnations, I think. And I think it's down to the individual to make those choices. But as I say, should that happen at an event or even a workshop, whatever it is, then we're prepared for it. We've both done mental health first aid training. Rachel's a qualified counsellor, and we know support agencies that provide emergency support, triage support, if that's what's necessary. But I think people choose their games accordingly. Would we put on an event that had nothing but Afghanistan tabletop war games being played? Probably not. I think what we look at is the diversity of games and the scenarios, rather than having one rule set to rule them all, as it were. I think it is a diverse audience, so we need to have a diverse event. And I think people can find, certainly we've been, as a result of wargaming, we've been told lots of experiences and stories that where people have had challenges in their lives and where wargaming has been a massive benefit to them. Largely linked to the social activity. I mean, the community that you're part of, whatever that community is. And I think that's very, very important to realize, that coming back to what we were talking about much earlier, if you're thinking of stepping your toe into this, find some players or a club before you spend any money, see if you like it. In my experience, most people would be supportive of any new players and members, because that's how the community thrives.
Yeah, it's it's a point I occasionally like to discuss on the program, because I've had most of the negative I've had has come from people outside the military, who are worried that they're going to upset somebody. And I think the thing for me, and you kind of alluded to it there, Steve, is to try and gauge your audience and make your audience aware of what you're planning on doing.
Ask them, absolutely. Just ask. If you're thinking of, look, we're looking at reenacting this scenario, so whether it's the first day of Optelic or what have you, then ask. If you certainly don't. I don't think anybody wants to knowingly run something that's going to trigger anybody in any circumstances. And I think it's also these things that very often take a lot of planning and thought setting up to run the scenario, run the game, have the figures, the painting, the scenery, the layout, so on and so forth. So I don't think it's the sort of thing you would just happen to walk into, if you know what I mean. Right. So, but that might be slightly different at a public-facing event, of course, where I think if that's something you're worried about, scope out, as I'm sure people will, the organisation or people that you want to join. You've always got the Veterans Wargaming Association, who are more than well aware of the challenges within the community, because they are the community. And find your tribe, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I've certainly had experiences in the past where people who've been, let's say, to Afghan have really got into wargaming Afghanistan, and kind of, oh yeah, well we would have done this, and oh we would have done, and they're often very good at pointing out things that aren't quite right in the way that you would play the game, for example, and bring their personal experience. Yeah, I knew somebody who'd been to Vietnam, and he just wouldn't even fucking look at a table. He says, "I never ever want to see jungle again in my life." So you just have to gauge your audience. I think that's the best way forward with it. It's been fantastic chatting to you guys today. So just to finish off. How can people get involved in Company of Makers? Where's your website? All that sort of stuff. How can people help you out?
We are www. As they still say. Do they still say that? But it's companyofmakers.com. You can email me directly at steve@companyofmakers.com. If you want to have a chat, I'm more than happy to jump on a Zoom, explore any possibilities, or equally importantly, if you've got any ideas, we'd love to hear from you.
Fantastic. Conrad, anything from you, mate?
No, just we've got one event coming up just to advertise a little bit. 24th of May over at the Army Flying Museum. A smaller event, but worthwhile. We've got hopefully have a few different genres playing. Last time we did it, we had guys doing the D-Day landings on the glider assault with one of the gliders, the real gliders behind them, which was quite impressive.
Nice.
24th of May, come along.
And do you get free access to the museum if you come along as well? If you book a ticket through us. So if you want to find out more, again, drop me an email. And there's lots of gliders and helicopters. It's the Army Air Corps, isn't it? Official museum. So
the Army Flying. Yes, it's great. And hopefully we'll be doing something big again next year. Steve and I are already coming up with ideas and planning and whatever. So we'll keep an eye open. Unfortunately, you can't do Cosford again because they're refurbishing their hangar. Unfortunately.
I know. Yeah, we used to do a show in the Army Transport Museum at Beverley. That closed down a number of years ago, but that was really good fun being, amongst the exhibits. And I know the Naval Wargames Society does something down at Yeovilton. You guys had Dave Manley, didn't you, down at Cosford?
Yeah.
Great lad.
But the problem is a lot of museums, of course, they fill their stuff up, they fill their space up with exhibits. So there's not many big open spaces.
Buggers.
Yeah, I know, what a pain.
And sometimes they move those exhibits without telling you, but that's another story.
Another story for another day.
Dear me. Well, thank you very much, guys. It's been lovely talking to you today. There's a lot of people who listen to this podcast who maybe didn't know about you before this, and I hope they'll get in touch and give you a hand with various things. So, as always, just time to say good night to the audience. So, good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you very much.
Yep. Good night, and thanks for having us on.
No worries, anytime.
Hope you enjoyed that chat there with Steve, Nick, and Conrad. I think that was a really important conversation. We got through lots of different topics around veterans and wargaming and veterans in general. And if you can, I know some of you already have. Who listen to this podcast, help them out in any way you can. I'm sure that we'll be all keen to support them. And I've said to Steve, if there's anything he wants to promote, just let me know and get it on the Facebook page. Let me know. I'll put it on the podcast, etc. And hopefully they will bring gaming into the lives of many other people. So we're coming up on a run of shows now that are all organised already, and 5 or 6 I think there is coming up over the next few months. So I'll be looking to maybe do them a little closer together than I normally would do, maybe a couple of weeks between each show, maybe 10 days in a couple of cases. So I did speak to somebody recently about coming on the show, and I just kind of had to say, as I've had to in the past, we're 3-4 months away from getting any new plans for new shows. So, curse of being popular, curse of having too many ideas for guests, and I'm not going to say too many different ideas for podcasts because that's what keeps me interested. The brews in the bin yard, the the listener phone in, all that sort of different things keeps me interested and keeps me doing this. So that's very important to me to vary the shows. So my next show is going to be with a couple of people I've known for a while through the Analog Hobbies Painting Challenge, and that's Ray Russell and I'll check on the pronunciation of that when I speak to him, and Big Lee, and they are part of the Posties Rejects, and we met up for the God knows how many time at Salute at the weekend. So we're going to have a chat about Lee and Ray's social media, and Lee's got a pretty big YouTube channel, and have a review of what we thought about Salute, which was generally positive. In fact, it was very positive. It was a really, really good show. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time for the Lee and Ray show. So they.